Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we'll finally be checking out the Russian Su-35S Flanker N, a tier 8 aircraft that costs 45,000 coins. It was one of the most highly requested videos and I've seen many people struggle to use it, so this video should hopefully solve that issue. Something that you should never do in this aircraft is use the stock loadout, which I'm doing here for the purpose of this video, because I know some of you guys wasted your upgrade points on something else. The stock loadout includes the R27ER and R73. Both are decent missiles but don't fit the top tier meta at all, and now I already have a missile coming towards me. You don't get a lot of chaff in this aircraft, so try to use it wisely. Staying in a pre-notch while not firing missiles at the enemy can help with that. This is especially important now that you have to hold the notch in order to defeat an active radar homing missile. Now, if you're wondering why the enemy isn't notching when I fired a semi-active radar homing missile at him, it's because I have a passive radar which doesn't alert the enemy if I'm hardlocking them. And that is one of the advantages of the R27ER, it doesn't notify the enemy on the RWR until it's 6 kilometers away. Otherwise, the R27ER is pretty mediocre. The range isn't that good, it's not that fast, and it's kinda heavy, making your performance a little bit worse. You should only fire it from higher altitudes, and it should also be noted that it cannot loft, meaning it cannot gain altitude after being launched. Here I got a lucky kill, but don't expect that to happen in an actual match. Before we take a look at the R77-1, we'll quickly go over the performance and offensive armament, starting with the performance. Despite having a good thrust-to-weight ratio, the climb rate is below average. When fully maxed, it can maintain Mach 1 at a 50-degree climb, but it can't sustain that forever. Another thing that's probably bothering you is the low turn rate. I didn't make a mistake while editing the video. The reason it is so low is because it doesn't account for thrust vectoring, which only starts effectively working at less than 500 km per hour. The Su-35S also has very poor energy retention, making you lose a large amount of speed while turning into a notch. Upgrading the engines is a must if you want to be competitive in a top tier lobby. Even though you'll rarely be using your gun, I still think it's worth mentioning it. You get one 30mm GSH-31 with 150 rounds when maxed. This gun is offset from the nose a bit, so you'll have to keep that in mind when aiming it. If you use the air target's belt, a well-placed shot can take out the enemy with ease. But most of the times you'll be using missiles. I'll be going over each one throughout the video. I'll leave the timestamps in the description if you came here for a specific missile. And finally, the countermeasures. You get a total of 84, 56 chaff and 28 flares. This isn't that much, so you'll have to be careful not to waste too many. I've already mentioned a couple missiles the Su-35 can carry, one of them being the R27ER. It's a semi-active radar homing missile with data link capabilities, meaning you can guide it without maintaining a hard lock. When it comes to the range it should be fired from, there's no specific number, so you'll have to look at the missile range indicator in the lower right corner of your screen. If you want to learn more about the missile, you'll have to go back to the intro clip, where I talk a bit more about it. Another missile I'd like to mention before going back to the gameplay is the R27ET, the IR version of the R27ER. It can be purchased for 130 upgrade points. It has a pretty good lock range for an infrared missile of around 40 km in ideal conditions. However, a public match does not feature such conditions, so using it is not recommended. Despite having a decent flare resistance of 8 and the get with RCCM, it can be flared if the enemy spots it in time, and some aircraft feature a missile approach warning, which makes it even less effective against skilled players. If you want to use it, you can, but I don't recommend it if you want to do well in a match. First active radar homing missile we'll take a look at in this video is the R77-1. It can be purchased for 150 upgrade points, and I highly recommend you do that before using this plane. Compared to the top tier meta, this missile isn't the best. While it does have a good max duple and decent radar set, the range isn't that good if fired from lower altitude. This forces you to spend time climbing to around 10 to 12 kilometers where this missile should be fired from if you don't want to get too close to the enemy. However, you can carry 12 of them, meaning you can easily launch 2 to 3 at one enemy and still be able to engage the entire enemy team without reloading if the lobby isn't too full. Launching them from different angles is very important, otherwise all launched missiles can be notched at once rather than one at a time. I'll quickly mention this plain stock infrared missile, the R-73. It's not a bad missile, but it doesn't fit the top tier playstyle at all. It forces you to get very close to the enemy, which is a death trap if they're using advanced infrared missiles, and it can be flared pretty easily if the enemy knows what they're doing. Only real use I see of this missile is to use it in duels. If you decide to do that, make sure don't fire it from too close, as a recent update noticeably increased the missile guidance warm-up, making most missiles miss at extremely close ranges. You can counter that by leading it and compensating for the time loss that it would have previously used for turning. And now we can take a look at some gameplay again. I'm carrying 12 R-77-1s and 2 R-73s. This loadout noticeably worsens your performance. You can see I'm losing speed while in a 35-degree angle, traveling at around 1000 km. So I spot an enemy around 50 km away from me and I fire 3 R-77-1s at him, all from different angles. This will make sure that he has to notch them at different times instead of notching them all at once. Now this radar is very good, which can allow me to notch and guide my missiles at the same time. However, I'm currently not notching as I see the enemy is constantly dipping into the ground and above it. However, this gave me a false sense of security, because I thought he wouldn't fire any missiles at me. What I should have done here is use my radar's full search cone and climb the pit. So that way I keep on gaining energy and make the enemy less likely to fire a missile at me, because he will see that I'm actually flying away from him. And then I noticed he has killed one of my teammates with his Vintier, so I knew he was actually sentient, and not just another brainless Wings of Ruler player. However, he crashed into the ground while trying to dodge my missiles, which disproves my theory. And now we'll take a look at another clip. Now we look at one final clip before moving to the R-37M and R-74M, and it will involve me getting a kill here. So, I'm gonna start off by firing 3 R-77-1s, all from different angles, at an enemy that's around 60 km away from me. He is currently notching, which made me a bit hesitant to fire these missiles, but I was expecting him to start flying towards me very soon. I am gonna enter a pre-notch position, that way if he fires a missile at me I'll already be notching them, and I won't have to waste as much energy or chaff trying to defeat it. I'm gonna keep a hard lock, and if at any point he decides to start flying away from me, I can forget about those missiles hitting him. But if he keeps flying straight, they might have a chance of hitting him. I will use this time when the missiles are flying towards the enemy to talk a bit about the radar. The radar is the IRBIS-E, a passive radar that does not notify the enemy if you're hardlocking them. That's why I was able to keep a hardlock here without making the enemy notch. The maximum detection range of this radar is also pretty good, and you should have no problems finding every single enemy in the lobby. That might change with the addition of the SC-57M, but we'll have to see how its RCS affects the gameplay. For now, we're gonna notch a couple missiles and see our missile hit the F-16. I would also like to take this time to warn you that you will be called a spammer if you fire 3 R-77-1s at one enemy. Unfortunately, with how the top tier meta has changed over the past, you have no other choice but to do that, so if you get called a spammer, just ignore the enemy. The second activated homing missile can purchase for 350 upgrade points is the R-37M. This is a very heavy missile that should only be carried in smaller quantities. Carrying the maximum possible amount of weight is not recommended if you want to carry other missiles like the R-77-1. I suggest you take a maximum of 4 or 5. Performance-wise, this missile has very good range of more than 100 km if fired from high altitude. It can also reach hypersonic speeds in ideal conditions, making it even more deadly for unaware enemies that didn't react to it in time. This missile does suffer a bit from the somewhat low max G-pull, which allows the enemy to dodge it if it's traveling very quickly. Other than that, it's a pretty good one that can definitely get you a decent amount of kills. Final missile I still haven't covered is the R-74M. It's essentially an upgraded R-73. It has a larger gimbal and much better flare resistance. However, just like the R-73, this missile has a relatively short range. Realistically, it's only going to be used in duels. If you're going to use it there, don't fire it from too close or try to lead in such situations if the enemy is turning. Firing it at an enemy that's pre-flaring is not a good idea. Most times it will go for the flares instead of the actual enemy, so try to avoid firing it in such situations. And now we can finally take a look at some gameplay using the R-37M. As you can see, I'm only carrying 4 instead of the maximum possible amount of 8. As already stated, this is done to improve my performance, and I usually fire one R37M and a couple R77-1s at the enemy. That way, if the R37M misses, the R77-1s can finish the enemy. It should also be noted that this gameplay was recorded before the update which changed how notching works. So if you see me notching quicker than you are notching a missile, that's because the game has changed and it's not an issue of skill. So if we focus back on the gameplay, the enemy that I fired the missiles at was still flying straight at me. But now it seems that he's starting to fly away from me, which will impact the amount of time my missiles need to hit. After he's done that, I think that my missiles will not hit, so I decide to turn back into the enemies to fire a couple more missiles. And then I decide to fire 3 R37Ms at 3 different enemies. If I've only fired the R37Ms, there's a high chance they will get notched and I will not get a single kill. If you like BVR combat, there's also another loadout that you can carry, which includes 8 R37Ms and no other missiles. That way you can stay very far away from the enemy and not be in the immediate danger of their missiles. And it seems like my R37M has missed the intended target. Luckily I fired 2 R37 once at the same enemy, which will end up hitting very soon. The enemy was trying to drain my missiles of energy, but that simply won't work out for him because they have way too much energy to be reliably dodged. And now they will end up hitting very soon. Now that we're already familiar with the loadout, we can focus on some other aspects of this aircraft, like the radar warning receiver, which is the SPO-32. For this tier, it's actually a pretty good one. You can reliably notch with it, and the RWR error is not that large, of only ±5 degrees. This can be a bit of a problem if you're flying at higher speeds and trying to notch a missile. That's why you see me slowing down while notching a missile, because it is much easier to notch a missile while you're going slower. You can also pretty easily identify enemy aircraft on the RWR, as their designations are easily readable. For instance, the EF stands for Eurofighter, the 15 stands for F-15, the 16 stands for F-16, and the RF stands for Rafale. You also get a compass, which doesn't really help you, but I guess it is a cool feature. I'll also quickly mention the missile approach warning, which this plane gets access to. It can detect targets up to 6 kilometers away, and it shows as a red line or RWR, so that's why sometimes when you're notching a missile in the Su-35, you'll see a red line near the M marker.